Hey, so I'm just going to go ahead and do my post for this week regarding the rich get richer and the poor get poor, part two. So in chapter two, it does a lot of discussion about what is deemed a crime or certain things. So we learn that, and I can relate it back to like the labeling theory where society decides what is labeled a crime and what is um, not necessarily seen as a crime, but it's the same type of act committed. So if you look at a person who shoots a person and kills them, we would call them a murderer. But if you look at people who are in the armed forces who are protecting Americans, they are seen as heroes or seen as doing their job, the civil thing to do. And so this chapter kind of talks about certain things that deal with um, how we decide what kind of protection we're receiving. It uses the imagery of a mirror. So when you look at a mirror and you see something pointing back at you, you're seeing an image, but the image on our side is not necessarily the true image because it's distorted. Because let's look at the fact that you do have murders. Let's start with the term murder. A person shoots somebody, that is a murder. A person strangles somebody or beats somebody in the street, that's a murder. But if you go on a job, as it was talking about, like the BP oil refinery, where people got hurt on the job because the right parameters were not put in place, no one is seen as a murderer there. It's just they did not follow all precautions. They're given a fine, and then we go on about life as it is. If we're going to call something a crime, everything should fit in that because technically that is a crime because you did not put the necessary things in place. The next thing I want to talk about is more so how criminal justice as a creative art. So certain behaviors and whatnot are seen as dangerous in society, and it kind of depends on what society says. So if society paints a picture and says we do not approve of this, then those that enforce the law are going to take that to heart and say, hey, we've got to take these people, get them off the street. And it goes on to talk about the people that make those decisions. So you have the legislators that make these laws. Um, you have the police who enforce the laws. You have the juries and the judges who decide if it was done right. You also have the other decisions that take place, such as the sentencing, and they come in and they say, hey, this is the parameters we're going to put in place to decide what happens with this person. And so I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me was about the legislators, because when we talk about public policy, we often think about the people who have to take those policies and enforce them or live through them like citizens. But the legislators, one of the hypotheses that the definition of crime in the criminal law does not reflect the only or most dangerous of antisocial behaviors. They go and they say um, this is not proven, or not necessarily proven. This is not acceptable, and they make a policy against it. But when they're making these policies, are they going through all the loopholes and making sure that um, everything is covered? Because that's how these big businesses get through. The big businesses do not have to necessarily adhere to what the rules are because they're not going to get in trouble for it. Because hey, we're a big business and we can't necessarily. No one person can take the fall for it. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about was um, pretty much defining things, the definition of crime. Um, in the book, it talks about how crime is something that causes misery and suffering. It has to cover everything because otherwise, we are creating a system that if you don't have money and you don't have the means to um, defend yourself, you are going to be under the law. And then one thing I was going to look at was it mentioned about the color of law. I look forward to reading that. I think I've read that at some point, but we all know that there are certain things that separate us in America, depending on the socioeconomic status or your race, your gender, those protective classes, and trying to get away from it. But still in 2020, we are still dealing with um, pretty much disrespect for those classes because it doesn't matter. You can't do anything to me because I have the resources to clear my name or whatever. So those are some of the things that need to be done in the next few years to combat some of the disproportionate effects that marginalized and minoritized communities are feeling, especially the poor, as it discusses in the book. Thank you.